step into the smoke-filled rooms of the White House and uncover the story of Florence Harding, one of America's most influential and controversial first ladies. Known as the Duchess, her life was a gripping saga of ambition, betrayal, and power. From being disowned by her powerful father for a scandalous elopement, she rose from disgrace to become the driving force behind her husband, President Warren G. Harding. Florence wasn't just a political wife. She was a brilliant businesswoman and a shrewd strategist who managed everything from a newspaper empire to a presidential campaign. This is the story of a woman who tolerated her husband's devastating affairs, faced down blackmailers, and in a final shocking act burned his personal papers after his mysterious death. Was she a loyal widow hiding her husband's secrets, or a co-conspirator erasing evidence of the Teapot Dome scandal? Delve into the complex life of Florence Harding and discover the formidable woman behind the rumors. To truly comprehend the forces that shaped one of America's most formidable and enigmatic first ladies, one must first journey back to the dusty, provincial heart of post-Civil War Ohio. In the town of Marion, a place governed by rigid social codes and the long shadows of its leading citizens, Florence Kling came into the world on August 15, 1860. She was not born into just any family. She was the eldest daughter of Amos Kling, a man who was less a citizen of Marion and more its gravitational center. Amos wasn't merely a banker and a prosperous merchant. He was the town's undeclared sovereign, a local tyrant whose wealth and influence were as pervasive as the air itself. His word could build a man up or tear him down. His approval was a coveted prize, and his displeasure was a social and economic death sentence. He was a figure of immense power, a man of domineering will and ruthless ambition, and he expected nothing less than absolute, unquestioning obedience from his family, most especially from Florence, his bright, fiercely intelligent, and dangerously headstrong daughter. From her earliest years, it was clear that Florence was cut from a different cloth than the other young women of her station. While her peers were diligently schooled in the domestic arts, needlepoint, household management, the gentle art of being agreeable, Florence's mind yearned for something more. Her spirit was drawn to the wider worlds of culture, art, and ambition. Her father, a man not given to sentiment but sharp enough to recognize a kindred intellect, saw a startling reflection of his own keen mind in his daughter. In a rare display of progressive thinking, he afforded her an education that was exceptional for a woman of that era. He sent her away from the confines of Marion to the prestigious Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. Here, in the hallowed halls of the conservatory, Florence immersed herself in the disciplined beauty of classical piano and the soaring emotion of voice training. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, it seemed her destiny might lie in the elegant world of art, a life of salons, sonatas, and concert halls, a world far removed from the stifling provincialism of her hometown. But it was not to be. The iron will she had inherited directly from her father, the very quality he admired in himself, was on a collision course with his own absolute authority. At the tender age of 19, an age of romantic ideals and reckless passion, Florence fell deeply in love. It was not a sensible match, not a strategic alliance that would have pleased her father and solidified the Kling dynasty in Marion. Instead, she gave her heart to Henry Pete DeWolf, a man who was everything her father was not: charming, carefree, and utterly unreliable. Pete was a handsome ne'er-do-well from a family that Amos Kling openly despised, a man with no prospects and even less discipline. The relationship was forbidden, a direct challenge to her father's authority. Amos, in no uncertain terms, forbade the union, but Florence, fueled by a potent cocktail of youthful love and A lifetime of suppressed rebellion made her choice. In her first great act of defiance against the man who ruled her world, she eloped with Pete DeWolf in 1880. She had chosen love, she thought, over duty. She had chosen freedom. The consequences were as swift as they were brutal. Amos Kling, the man who controlled every lever of power in Marion, reacted with the full force of his tyrannical nature. He did not simply lecture his daughter. He erased her. He publicly and privately disowned her, severing all ties, both financial and emotional. The doors of her childhood home were closed to her, her name was struck from the family ledger, and she was cast out into the cold, unforgiving world with nothing but the man she had chosen. For Florence, the incandescent dream of romantic escape quickly soured into a grim, grinding reality. Pete DeWolf, the charming rogue, proved to be an irresponsible drunk and a feckless drifter. The romance withered under the harsh glare of poverty and neglect. Within months, he had squandered what little they had, and in a final act of cowardice, abandoned his now pregnant wife. Florence was left utterly alone. She was a social pariah in her own hometown, a disowned daughter, an abandoned wife, and soon to be a single mother in an era where such a status was a mark of profound and inescapable shame. She was forced to return to Marion, not in triumph, but in disgrace. To survive, she fell back on her one respectable skill, her music. For 6 long, arduous years, she scraped together a meager existence by giving piano lessons to the town's children, often in the very homes of families who whispered about her behind her back. Every day was a battle for dignity, a constant, humiliating reminder of her father's cold rejection and the catastrophic consequences of her own youthful choice. But these years of profound hardship, this crucible of shame and poverty, did not break Florence Kling DeWolf. They forged her. The fire burned away her girlish naivete and replaced it with something harder, something more resilient. This period taught her invaluable, brutal lessons in self-reliance, independence, and a steely-eyed pragmatism that would become her defining characteristic. She learned with absolute certainty that she could rely on no one but herself. In 1886, she took the final step in closing this painful chapter of her life. She finalized her divorce from Pete DeWolf, legally and symbolically shedding the last vestige of her youthful mistake and reclaiming her own name, Florence Kling. It was during this period of quiet rebuilding that a new figure entered her orbit, a man who was, in nearly every conceivable way, her polar opposite. His name was Warren G. Harding. He was the new owner and editor of the town's struggling local newspaper, the Marion Star, and he was possessed of a startling, almost cinematic handsomeness. Where Florence was sharp-witted, calculating, and hardened by life's cruelties, Warren was preternaturally easygoing, endlessly charming, and blessed with an unshakable optimism. He possessed none of Florence's discipline or business acumen. In fact, he was notoriously lax with finances and details. But what he had in spades was a natural, effortless charisma, a warmth that drew people to him like moths to a flame. Florence, with her keen, analytical eye, saw something in Warren beyond the handsome face and charming smile. Perhaps in this amiable, ambitious man she saw a potential vessel for the ambition that had been so long suppressed within herself. She saw raw material, a beautiful ship with a weak rudder that she, with her steady hand, could steer. And Warren, for his part, saw something in Florence that he knew he desperately lacked. He saw her strength, her fierce intelligence, her unwavering resolve. He saw a partner who could manage the tedious, complicated aspects of life that he so disliked, freeing him to do what he did best, connect with people. A partnership began to form, one built on a foundation of complementary strengths and weaknesses. This courtship between the 30-year-old divorcee and the 25-year-old bachelor became the talk of Marion's society, a minor scandal that titillated the town gossips. She was a woman with a past 5 years his senior, and he was a rising star. And to the eternal incandescent fury of Amos Kling, they decided to marry. The wedding day, in 1891, stands as a testament to the deep fissures in the Kling family. Amos Kling did not walk his daughter down the aisle. He did not give her away with a fatherly blessing. Instead, he performed a gesture of almost theatrical menace. He stood on the porch of his grand house, which was along the route the wedding party had to take, holding a shotgun. As the couple passed, he made it clear through his glares and his posture that he was threatening to shoot his new son-in-law, a man he viewed as an opportunistic upstart who had stolen his daughter. He loudly and bitterly prophesied that the marriage wouldn't last a single year. Amos Kling was a man accustomed to being right, but on this he was profoundly wrong. The marriage would last for 32 years, a complex, turbulent, and powerful tapestry woven from threads of partnership, genuine passion, gut-wrenching betrayal, and a shared, relentless pursuit of power that would ultimately take them from the dusty streets of Marion, Ohio, to the pinnacle of American life, the White House. But the White House was a distant, almost unimaginable dream in those early years. First, there was the immediate, pressing problem of the Marion Star. When Florence married Warren, the newspaper was a financial disaster. It was Warren's passion project, but it was bleeding money. Warren loved the grandstanding part of the job, writing eloquent editorials, hobnobbing with local politicians, and being a celebrated public figure. He absolutely detested the grinding, tedious work of actually running a business, managing accounts, chasing advertisers, and overseeing distribution. Florence, however, thrived on it. It was a challenge that perfectly suited the skills she had honed during her years of solitary struggle. She didn't just offer advice, she seized control. With the force of a whirlwind, Florence took over the entire business side of the paper. She implemented systems where there had been chaos. Her most significant innovation was establishing a formal circulation department, a novel concept for a small-town paper at the time. She didn't just create it, she ran it herself with an iron fist and an almost military precision. The local paper boys, who had been a ragtag, undisciplined bunch, were soon straightened out by her exacting standards. It was during this time that the people of Marion bestowed upon her the nickname that would follow her for the rest of her life, the Duchess. It was a name born of both respect and a little bit of fear, a nod to her demanding, often imperious and unfailingly effective management style. She was tough, she was shrewd, and she was brilliant. She would personally haggle with paper suppliers to get the best price. She meticulously managed the finances down to the last penny, and she held every employee accountable. Under the command of the Duchess, the Marion Star transformed from a local rag teetering on the edge of bankruptcy into a profitable, powerful, and influential enterprise. It was Florence's business brain, her relentless drive, and her unwavering focus that built the financial foundation upon which Warren G. Harding's entire future political career would stand. She was never just the publisher's wife, she was the engine of his success, the hidden architect of their shared ascent. As the newspaper's profile and profitability grew, so too did Warren's political ambitions, which were, in truth, their collective ambitions. With Florence managing the financial base and acting as his sharpest strategist, he began his climb. He was elected to the Ohio State Senate, then as Lieutenant Governor of Ohio, and finally in 1914, he won a coveted seat as a U.S. Senator. Florence was with him every step of the way, not as a silent, supportive spouse who simply smiled for the cameras, but as his chief of staff, his most ruthless critic, and his most trusted advisor. She understood the mechanics of power, the art of the deal, and the importance of public perception in a way that the more naive Warren never fully grasped. She knew how to wield power, and she was content to do so from behind the scenes, pushing him ever forward. Yet, as their public life flourished into a portrait of American success, their private life was a minefield, riddled with secrets and betrayals that would have utterly destroyed a less pragmatic, less resilient woman. The Duchess, the master manager of their public enterprise, now had to manage her husband's one great recurring weakness, his insatiable, almost pathological appetite for other women. His most significant and dangerous affair was with Carrie Phillips, the wife of one of their closest friends in Marion. This was not a fleeting, sordid dalliance. It was a passionate, deeply emotional, and long-standing affair that spanned nearly 2 decades, from 1905 until Harding's death in 1923. Over these years, Warren penned hundreds of florid, deeply compromising, and often sexually explicit love letters to Carrie. These letters were not just evidence of infidelity. They were a ticking time bomb, a cache of political dynamite that could obliterate his career at any moment. Florence knew about the affair. One can only imagine the profound daily humiliation she must have endured. The whispers in town, the knowing glances, the private agony of her husband's love for another woman, a woman who was supposed to be her friend. But the Duchess was, above all else, a survivor. She made a calculated decision. She chose to endure the private pain, the searing humiliation, in order to protect the public partnership, the grand project of their lives that she had worked so tirelessly to build. Her steely resolve was put to the ultimate test in 1920. Warren, against all odds, had secured the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Carrie Phillips, who had been receiving hush money from Warren for years, saw her moment of maximum leverage. She issued a cold, calculated ultimatum. She threatened to expose the entire affair and release the cache of damning love letters unless she was paid a massive sum of money, and in a particularly audacious demand, given a long, luxurious, all-expenses-paid trip to Japan and China to keep her out of the country and away from reporters during the critical election season. It was pure, unadulterated blackmail. The Republican National Committee was thrown into a state of sheer panic. The entire campaign, the fate of the party, hung in the balance. But Florence the Duchess remained preternaturally calm. As the Washington Post would later confirm through historical records, she was not a bystander in this crisis. She was instrumental in its resolution. She did not collapse in a fit of jealous rage or self-pity. She approached the problem as she would any business crisis, with cold logic and a focus on the desired outcome. Reports suggest she may have met with Carrie herself, a meeting of unimaginable tension between wife and mistress. She helped facilitate the payoff, ensuring the RNC delivered the money and the travel arrangements. In that moment, Florence Harding took her personal pain, her heartbreak, her fury, and she locked it away in an impenetrable box. She put the mission first, ensuring their path to the White House remained clear of the debris of her husband's indiscretions. And astonishingly, Carrie Phillips wasn't the only fire she had to put out. Another affair, in many ways far more dangerous due to its potential for public scandal, was happening concurrently. From 1917 until his death, Warren carried on a secret relationship with a young woman from Marion named Nan Britton. She was more than 30 years his junior, a woman who had idolized him since she was a schoolgirl. Their secret trysts were brazen, allegedly taking place in a variety of locations, including, infamously, a small closet in his Senate office building. This affair was not without consequence. It produced a child, a daughter named Elizabeth Ann. While the exact timeline of Florence's knowledge of Nan Britton and her secret daughter is unclear, it represented yet another layer of profound and intimate betrayal that she was forced to navigate. A secret child was a permanent, living, breathing piece of evidence of his infidelity. It was a constant threat of exposure that loomed over them, all while they were tasked with presenting the image of a happy, devoted, all-American political couple to the nation. The betrayals she endured were not just romantic, they were also chillingly familial. In a stunning act of paternal cruelty, her own father, Amos Kling, emerged from the past to try and sabotage Warren's career. Still simmering with a bitterness that had not cooled over the decades, Amos started and maliciously spread a vicious rumor in 1905. He claimed that Warren Harding, a man from a respectable Ohio family, had mixed-race ancestry, or, as the parlance of the time had it, a touch of the tar brush. In the deeply racist and segregated climate of early 20th century America, this was not mere gossip. It was a smear designed to be politically fatal, an accusation intended to end his career before it had truly begun. Florence was once again faced with a terrible, impossible choice. Her husband, the partner of her life's work, or her father, the man who had cast her out years before. She chose Warren without hesitation. She cut her father out of her life completely, shunning the man who had first disowned her, and who now, out of pure spite, sought to ruin the new life she had so painstakingly built. They would eventually reconcile years later, just before Amos's death in 1913, but the deep, ragged wound of his ultimate betrayal never truly healed. With a life so steeped in chaos, uncertainty, and the constant threat of secrets being exposed, it is perhaps no surprise that Florence sought guidance and a sense of control from an unconventional source. She became deeply, almost religiously reliant on an astrologer and psychic who went by the theatrical name of Madame Marcia Champré. Before she would give her final blessing for Warren to seek the presidency in 1920, Florence insisted on a consultation with Madame Marcia. The seer delivered a chillingly specific two-part prophecy. Warren, she predicted, would win the presidency, but, she added, he would die in office. This dark, fatalistic prediction hung over Florence like a shroud throughout their entire time in the White House. Her deep reliance on astrology was something of an open secret in the political circles of Washington, a source of quiet amusement and mockery for many, as publications like the Boston Globe subtly noted. But for Florence, a woman navigating a treacherous world of political intrigue, personal betrayals, and devastating secrets, the stars and their supposed prophecies offered what reality could not: a semblance of order, a pre-written script, a roadmap through the encroaching darkness. In 1921, the first part of Madame Marcia's prophecy came true. Warren G. Harding was inaugurated as the 29th President of the United States, and Florence Harding, the former outcast of Marion, became the First Lady. She stepped into this august role not with timidity, but with the same boundless energy and commanding presence she had brought to the circulation desk of the Marion Star. She had no intention of being a passive, decorative hostess. She redefined the role for a new, modern era. She was an active, engaged, and politically savvy First Lady. She symbolically threw open the gates of the White House, which had been closed to the public during the war, hosting large garden parties for veterans and ordinary citizens. She championed causes she believed in, including women's rights, animal welfare, and humane societies. A master of public relations long before the term was common, she understood the power of the press, holding her own regular press conferences with female reporters and carefully managing both her and her husband's public image. She modernized the White House itself, overseeing the installation of new technology and hosting glamorous, lively events that helped signal to the nation that the grim austerity of the Great War was finally over. She was, in nearly every aspect, the first truly modern First Lady, a political partner as much as a presidential spouse. But behind the glamorous facade of White House receptions and public appearances, the private tragedies were beginning to mount, creating a perfect storm of grief, stress, and declining health. The first and perhaps most devastating blow had struck years earlier. On January 1st, 1915, her son, Marshall DeWolf, the baby she had fought so fiercely to raise on her own, the living symbol of her early struggles, died of tuberculosis. He was only 34 years old. In a biographical detail that has long puzzled and intrigued historians, Florence, for reasons that remain shrouded in mystery, did not attend her own son's funeral. Was her own health too fragile? She had, after all, suffered a near-fatal attack of chronic nephritis, a debilitating kidney disease, in 1911 that left her permanently weakened. Were her duties as a U.S. Senator's wife too demanding to allow her to travel? Or, perhaps most tragically, had the emotional distance born of a difficult and complicated life become a chasm too vast to cross, even in death? Whatever the reason, it was a profound and sorrowful loss, a grief that she was forced to bear largely in private, away from the public eye. Her own health was a constant, relentless battle. The chronic nephritis that had plagued her for years worsened significantly under the immense physical and emotional stress of being First Lady. She was often in agonizing pain, her body failing her even as her indomitable will pushed her forward through an endless schedule of public duties. Then came the fateful summer of 1923. The Harding administration, which had ridden into office on a wave of popularity and a promise of a return to normalcy, was beginning to show deep systemic cracks. The whispers of cronyism and corruption that had been circulating in Washington were growing into a deafening roar. The scandal that would later explode into the history books as the Teapot Dome affair, a sordid tale of secret, no-bid leases of naval oil reserves in exchange for massive bribes paid to a member of Harding's own cabinet, was bubbling just beneath the surface. Warren was visibly overwhelmed. The charming, easygoing man from Marion was not built for this level of high-stakes stress and insidious deceit. In a desperate attempt to reconnect with the American people and escape the toxic atmosphere of Washington, he embarked on a grueling cross-country tour, which he dubbed the Voyage of Understanding. Florence, ever the dutiful partner and protector, was by his side. It was in San Francisco on the evening of August 2nd, 1923, in their suite at the Grand Palace Hotel, that the second part of Madame Marcia's prophecy came true. After a week of confusing and conflicting reports about his health, President Warren G. Harding died suddenly. He was 57 years old. The official cause of death was given as a heart attack, or, as some doctors termed it, an apoplectic stroke. But in the immediate aftermath, Florence made a decision that would overshadow her husband's death and fuel speculation and conspiracy theories for decades. She flatly refused to allow an autopsy to be performed. The final year of Florence Harding's life was a quiet, painful, and rapid decline. Freed from the immense pressures and public obligations of the White House, she returned to the familiar quiet of Marion, Ohio. But her health, always precarious, now collapsed completely. The chronic nephritis that had tormented her for so long finally overwhelmed her body's defenses. It was as if the immense force of will that had held her together, that had driven her for decades, finally gave out once her life's great project, managing Warren Harding, was over. The engine had lost its purpose. On November 21st, 1924, just 15 short months after her husband's death, Florence Harding died in her home. She was 64 years old. The official cause of death was end-stage renal failure and complicating heart failure. But many who knew her story believe she simply died of a broken heart, or perhaps of a body that could no longer bear the immense physical weight of all the secrets it had been forced to keep. Her funeral was held at the Trinity Baptist Church in Marion, and she was buried in the Marion Memorial Park, finally at rest. In her last will and testament, she offered one final piece of proof of the astute business acumen she had honed at the Marion Star so many years ago. She left behind a meticulously managed estate worth nearly $1 million, a colossal sum in 1924, with the majority of it going to her grandchildren and various charities she had supported.